And welcome back to the Brigitte Mabandla Justice College. And of course, continuing to unpack the testimony yesterday of Vusimuzi Matlala here at the Madlanga Commission. And unfortunately, Tebogo Khaas unable to join us, but Kenny Mapanga is here. So we get a chance to continue unpacking what we started in the previous half hour. So Kenny, just getting straight back to that evidence. So we knew right from the onset that Vusimuzi Matlala would invoke his right to not self-incriminate. But one also had a sense that because he is physically present, the Commission would try to get as much as they could from him in terms of clarity on certain issues and answers where possible. But of course, we saw right from the onset Advocate Founder Chairperson, trying to assert her client's right not to self-incriminate.
Absolutely. Kat Matlala is really a witness who really at this point is of no assistance to the Commission. If you look at the very short statement that he provided with response to some of the questions that the Commission has to him, even the answers that he's willing to offer are still quite vague. It doesn't tell you what the relationship is about. And anytime you see the clarity-seeking questions trying to get to the bottom of what the relationship could be, then of course that right is invoked against self-incrimination. There's so many things that he made broad, generalized statements about in terms of that privilege, but it wasn't substantiated. So even with the supplementary and the application that they are set to file in the next coming days, it seems that every single point that wants to be touched on, which also emanates from a recording taken by the investigators, is something that he's going to dispute because he's disputing the recordings. He's got a number of criminal matters that he has to face. The Medicare24 fraud case has literally fallen apart before the Madlanga Commission because of the amount of illegalities that followed the search and seizure. And we now know from Juram Sami's evidence that the 28-1 authorization in her name was actually allegedly manufactured. And it is understood that that was allegedly used to approach the PKTT to get the devices of Vusimuzi Matlala. And there was allegedly a target to ensure that those devices were linked to certain high-ranking generals. So there's a lot of information that Vusimuzi Matlala finds himself embroiled in that is currently before the criminal process and has the potential to go into that criminal process. So off of that alone, he's invoking that privilege, which renders his appearance before the Madlanga Commission as something that really cannot take the evidence further. But what he chooses to be candid about, which I think in the main was only allegations surrounding Police Minister Senzo Mchunu and Brown Mkhotsi, he confirms that Beyicele allegedly told him that Mchunu had an interest in allegedly targeting certain individuals, so Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo, and replacing him with Major-General Feroz Khan. So we're seeing allegations continue to come up that mirror one another from different streams of evidence. And that's why I'm saying that in terms of Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, I don't think the denial of knowing him or never meeting him clears him in any way, because he still finds himself at the center of the tool that was allegedly used to fight those factional battles within the South African Police Services, that is IDAC. So there's still questions to answer with respect to that. And it still raises alarm bells about the very fast and uninformed PKTT disbandment directive. Because if you go to that particular timeline and you now look at what was taking place with former IDAC head Advocate Andrea Johnson, the pressure to take Project Diversion to court and launch it in all the different phases and ensure that it allegedly targets certain individuals, the dots are starting to connect in that particular space. And I think there is where the Police Minister will have to answer several other questions in that regard. So not clear yet. And I think with Kat Matlala, all you have is a witness that really can't be of assistance at this point. But I do think that the evidence where he chooses to be silent speaks for itself.
And interestingly, around the suspended Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, is that that was the starting point of all of this, given the directive to disband the political killings task team. But then a very wide berth that really didn't speak to that particular matter as far as he's concerned until we got to IDAC, really. And that's when you started to see more clearly how the suspended minister was potentially involved. You look at the Inspector General's report that was sent to IDAC, and we heard Drew Ramsamy come back and say, well, she went and listened to a recording from the meeting that was held, where she then came to correct an earlier statement that she had made before the commission, that it was not Minister Senzo Mchunu directly who handed over that report, but the report came from his office.
Absolutely, and it's quite clear that the crime intelligence boss in the main, Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo, was always the alleged target in this regard. The PKTT was misunderstood as something that was sent to Gauteng by Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, and it wasn't. They were supporting counterintelligence at the time, because Khumalo did explain that in terms of the investigations they were doing, there were leaks, people were being given heads up that cops were going to come to their residence, and CAT confirms that Brian Mokhotsi allegedly gave him that heads up that they were going to come and do a raid and operation at his home. And it seems that PKTT was going to be used in order to allegedly target Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo, because it was the quote-unquote plot to ensure that whatever took place at that raid at Kat Matlala's home would manifest into a case against members of the PKTT and then result in consequences for Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo. All you've seen so far is how the efforts to intensify this alleged plot then manifested in IDAC, which is designed to fight high-level corruption, but found itself in knee-deep into crime intelligence matters. And it seems that they were largely allegedly informed by Major-General Feroz Khan, and it doesn't assist that Police Minister Senzo Mchunu gave that or arranged for that IGI report, which was not complete and was classified, to be given to the IDAC's investigators in a manner that fell outside of the expected protocol. And the only inference in that action is that it was allegedly supposed to assist IDAC in strengthening their case, because there were a number of red flags that were being raised about the legalities of the manner in which they were approaching these crime intelligence matters. And in fact, a memo was written to say that there was no prima facie case in either the Mukwele or the Lushaba matter, and it didn't even engage IDAC's mandate. All of that adds up, and the data is starting to connect that this is really where you find the roots to that PKTT disbandment directive and what the intention and purpose of that was.
And of course, all of that speaks also again to Feroz Khan and what was potentially being done in order to ensure his ascendance to the head of crime intelligence, so to speak. Now, again, Kat Matlala says, don't know this guy. For all intents and purposes, like with the minister who's now on suspension, Senzo Mchunu, he's never met them. But then again, there's an IDAC link with Feroz Khan, but in the case of the suspended minister, you have Brown Mokhotsi. Now, that becomes very interesting, because it seems as though Brown was being opportunistic in how he actually married those two scenarios between the minister and, of course, Kat Matlala.
Yes, I think in the WhatsApp exchanges, it's quite clear that Kat Matlala believed that he would have a meeting with the Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. I don't think that the latest evidence changes that particular fact. It's about whether or not Mchunu was involved in this alleged triangular dynamic that you see between Brian Mokhotsi and Kat Matlala, and purportedly with the Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, because at all times that Kat Matlala assists Brian Mokhotsi, it can only be because he thought he had this proximity to the Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. Outside of that link or connection, then he wouldn't have been able to access Kat Matlala and purport to be assisting him with his contract, or purport to have a meeting that he's going to have to set up with him and the Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. It is through those chats or that alleged proximity or perceived proximity that Brian Mokhotsi is able to milk Vusimuzi Kat Matlala of a lot of money, even down to paying for the January 8th in Cape Town. So there is some form of a link there between Brown and Cat. It's about understanding whether or not Police Minister Senzo Mchunu was playing a role. Because when Brown Mokgotsi sends that we have a breakthrough text to Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, it coincides around the time that the PKTT
That's
had
where it
raided.
gets interesting.
Yes, so the question is was Police Minister Senzo Mchunu aware, or were these individuals all allegedly being swindled by Brown Mokgotsi? But there definitely is that link or connection there, but it's not clear as to whether or not the police minister was aware of the arrangement with alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Matlala, but there is a consistent allegation about Mchunu at this point and the alleged targeting of high-ranking generals. And I think at the very least, it has been shown in evidence that IDAC was playing directly into that particular objective. Brown Mokgotsi, too, with Matlala, but it's not clear at this stage whether or not Police Minister Senzo Mchunu knew about Brown Mokgotsi's engagements with Matlala. But at the very least, I don't think the denials by Cat clear him to the extent that you can't find him in the IDAC stream, where he clearly is involved and having meetings with former IDAC head Advocate Andrea Johnson. And following those meetings, there is this intense rush to take these matters to court by May. The meeting takes place in January. By May, they want these people in court. They following a procedure where you reach a conclusion first and you only do the authorization and the paperwork after. Everything is upside down in the process. And you can see that there's a rush to make sure that these individuals get to court, are charged, and the consequences of being charged then follow. And we do see that General Fani Masemola was charged and he had to step down in the interim from his role as the top cop. Lieutenant General Dumisani Khumalo and the subsequent others had to, in terms of that bail condition, which has since been withdrawn, to also not enter any crime intelligence office in the country until that bail condition was amended. But still, it speaks to a significant pattern that continues to emerge, that there were certain cops that were allegedly the targets, and the same names continue to pop up. So even with Matlala's denials, you still find yourself at that particular point. And that still needs to be tested with respect to the decisions that Police Minister Senzo Mchunu took and what may have informed or allegedly influenced such decisions.
And then the infamous Impalas. So when it comes to Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia, Matlala yesterday neither confirmed nor denied, the issue of the Impalas, as it were. But there was a recording that was played before this commission previously, where it became very clear that the Impalas had been bought and they were to be delivered. And Sergeant Fani Nkosi, of course, being the go-between at that point between Shadrack Sibia and, of course, Matlala.
Matlala doesn't address the Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia and Major General Richard Shabiri link because he can't dispute that hard evidence. It's there in the WhatsApp exchanges because to some extent you see Sergeant Fani Nkosi for both playing that alleged middleman role, and I don't recall Sergeant Fani Nkosi denying that at all times those interactions were on behalf of his superiors. Major General Richard Shabiri has already admitted to getting that money from Matlala, but the only thing that he engages a twist into the narrative about is he says that it was a loan.
Yeah.
That's the only thing he changes about the story. But with Lieutenant...
Which the commission challenged, just to remind our viewers, in terms of he had money in his accounts at the time, Major General Shabiri, but still chose.
And when he realized that that transaction could come up as something that could be quite troubling for him, he quickly pays back the funds that were given. But it doesn't change the dynamic of what was taking place. With Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia, there are several instances where Sergeant Fani Nkosi is communicating with Matlala, and it's clearly not for himself, but allegedly for Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia. The Impala scenario is just one of those many instances where you see the conversation taking place. What that it becomes difficult for Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia because the farmer himself sends a voice note to say he's going to deliver and he wants a pin and a location. Sergeant Faninkosi gets that message from CAT and then gets the pin from Sibia, then sends it back to CAT so that CAT can send it to the farmer. So the connection is quite clear there, and I don't think it would be in his interest or Advocate Fadenhever's Clyde's interest for him to address that particular portion of the evidence, which is quite clear. It doesn't need a denial in that regard. It's quite clear what the dynamic was. It's just about establishing what the alleged benefit would have been for Kat Matlala to do all of these alleged favors for Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibia.
And then, of course, the question was asked about the bank card that, again, evidence was attested to here before the commission, where Sergeant Faninkosi
was found with it, yes.
Was found with it and had it on several occasions to do several things. There were several transactions there. But again, Kat Matlala invoking his right on his other company, what's it called, Luxor, the other company, not Medicare24, and saying that, you know, the matter is sub judice, essentially.
Yes, there's a lot of evidence that goes into different areas. So he's able to claim that, okay, this is part of the recording. I'm disputing it, so I can't speak about that. This is the Medicare24 fraud case. I'm disputing that, so I can't speak about that. This could easily be part of an ongoing investigation, so I can't speak about that. So there's this veil that he hides behind, a general broad statement that he makes that if there's a potential for a matter to be investigated, then he won't speak about it because he has the right to be presumed innocent before proven guilty. And it's a problematic way of approaching the evidence because the facts are the facts no matter where you place them, whether it's
even the loan agreement with Karim, he was asked about and
refused because there's a potential that he could be subjected to a criminal process over that. But even in the criminal process, your facts would remain the same if indeed you were telling the truth. So even that privilege itself has limitations, which is why the Commission is seeking that substantive application and the supplementary affidavit that explains on which ground you could rely on that privilege pretty much in all of the evidence that is quite critical to the Commission in terms of its fact-finding mission. So we'll see in the next few days what the explanation is, but I'm not sure that the Commission will be able to draw any kind of substantive information from alleged cartel member Vusimuzi Kat Matlala, not at least while he's facing these criminal processes.
There was an interesting question about where Advocate Silo tried to ask him about what he had said before the ad hoc committee in Parliament and a potential instance where he may have perjured himself in that particular commission. But again, you know, there was an opportunity for him to perhaps just say yes or no, but then invoking that right. Because the question was a fairly innocuous one of, you know, were you, you know, induced, you know, were you pressured into giving false evidence before the ad hoc committee? And again, did not answer the question.
Again, it was misunderstood as to whether or not he was being asked if he committed perjury. That was not the question at that stage. The question was whether or not he was forced or induced to give false testimony before the ad hoc because he's someone that gave evidence that is completely contradictory to what he stated to investigators at the time when they just pounced on him and arrested him, and he was clearly upset that all of his favors had not gained any form of alleged benefit for him. So he clearly spilled the beans in that recording, which is now something that he seeks to dispute before the criminal process. Even something as simple as that is a question that he refused to entertain in terms of the fact-finding mission here at the Commission, which is why I say he's not going to be a witness. Even when he returns, I don't see a scenario where he'll be of assistance to the probe in any manner, because he holds the view that if he answers in the positive, then that results in criminal consequences for him in the future, should he do so here.
Perhaps it's just another way of placing his evidence on record anyway, whereas in previous instances, like in the case of Van Wyk, for example, you didn't have someone to speak to whatever was being presented and read into the record. And here, at least in some instances, there is a voice, to say, well, I will respond to this in a supplementary affidavit, etc. But we're going to park that there for the time being and send it back to studio, and we'll continue unpacking what happened here on day one of Vusimuzi Cat Matlala's evidence before the Madlanga Commission.